All right, so this is kind of a discussion on the differences of TI and TE. So this tends to be a very debated and kind of talked about subject. It can be very difficult to differentiate between TI and TE. Okay, it's not always as simple as just logic or pragmatism and so on. These are useful terms. They kind of work, but they sometimes get a little bit muddled. All right, so what's a TI user doing? TI people are essentially kind of working from abstract theory, and that's literally what you see them doing. When you're staring at somebody, they are just discussing things from pure theory. They are going inside into their mind and they want to reason out something. So this sounds a lot like lawyer talk. This sounds a lot like academic types of individuals giving you this hypothetical theory where everything in the theory has to make sense. It has to be well reasoned. And you'll hear that. Does the reasoning sound good? So you can see these things with like very abstract math type of stuff as well. Talking with famous people makes kind of a decent point on that, because that's sort of what it seems like. Very much like A plus B equals C. If that's true, then C minus B equals what? Right? Just, well, based on the reasoning. Notice all of that, though, means nothing. What is A? What is B? What is C? What does any of that really mean? Nothing. We're just speaking purely hypothetical, theory, so on, and it all has to make sense along the way. So in law, it's kind of the same thing. Here's what the law states. If that's what it says, then this happens, then this is what we reach to. Does that make sense and track? Yes, it does. That's it. Very hypothetical, very pulled out from reality. You're not staring at the external world looking at what's actually happening. You're just articulating the theory and how it's supposed to all connect and make sense and be consistent with it. Once you state that A plus B equals C, you got to be consistent with that. You can't suddenly go, well, but not always, sometimes it doesn't equal C. Well, what do you mean it doesn't equal C? It has to stay consistent. So consistency is a key part of how we look at a TI valuing person. Right? Now, the TE valuing person is focused more on what we actually see objectively in the real world. It's not interested in going into these hypothetical, abstract, in your mind, reasoned conversation. It's really more about look at what we actually see that's really happening. So, yeah, theoretically, A plus B equals C, fine. But you know what? We've noticed situations in the real world where it just doesn't always work like that. It just doesn't always happen. And here's the context, the situations when it does work, situations when it doesn't work. Right now, it's turning into a case-by-case, situational, based on experience and data kind of conversation. And we see this all the time. Okay? For me, I guess from the worlds that I come from, maybe some of these examples can be helpful for some people, maybe not. But you might get into something where, let's say someone's talking about a certain martial art and they're saying, well, in theory, if you can do the fancy jumping, spinning back kick, it's going to surprise somebody because they're not expecting that, and therefore you're more likely to land and score a knockout and finish the fight or whatever. You're like, okay, yeah, I see where you're going with that logic. It's reasonable. All right. But in actuality, how many times statistically have you seen that technique work? And then you say, well, maybe only a handful of times or whatever. So therefore, what's the real value of that anymore? Who gives a shit? The percentage of it actually working the way the theory says it should work is too low. Who cares? You know what? Something comes to mind. From the Myers-Briggs version of things, I remember seeing how MBTI would have all these statistics. Kiersey would have these too. Statistics on how often you see a person, a certain type. And one of the classic ones is like INFJs, extremely rare little snowflakes, and they're only about 2% of the population. maybe less, maybe 1.5 or something. And yet, through observation, I would notice that I couldn't throw a rock without hitting an INFJ. They were everywhere. Everybody was an INFJ. Every time you put a little INFJ quote somewhere, everyone relates to it. So you stop and think, okay, something doesn't add up. According to your theory, your system, this is a rare type, only 2%. So I should very seldomly encounter these people. Yet, I find them all over the place. Therefore, there cannot possibly be 2%. They could not possibly be that rare. So either your statistics and measurements are wrong, or your whole system is fucked up and it's wrong, right? Now, how am I getting to that? Through observation, through looking at my own data that I can see for myself. Your 2% does not add up, right? In the realm of typology, socionics, all these discussions, this is a great place where TE valuing versus TI valuing people can really help each other a lot. The TI individuals are probably the people most likely to help drive the theory forward, to really dig deep into the theoretical framework of how socionics is supposed to work, right? And make sure that every step of it makes sense, things flow correctly from one thing to another, from one function to another function, and so on. They want to really pay a close attention to that and iron that out. Your TE individuals are not as interested in that part because it's just kind of boring and draining. But the TE individuals contribute that data-driven, observation-driven side of it, going, okay, that's your theory. Have I seen that in reality? What have I seen in reality? Well, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I see that works. This is what people are saying when I ask them questions and survey them, and etc. Based on what I'm seeing, this is what actually is happening. So both can be used to derive better information, a better system, but they're coming at it from two different directions. One of them wants to sort of sit back, think about it in a reasoned way. Let me reason out what makes sense and is consistent. The other is going, let me go out into the world and gather information, gather data based on what's happening out here. I want to see it. I want to observe it. I want to measure it somehow. I want to get survey information from people when I ask them questions and so on, etc. And then based on what I'm getting as data, I can now begin to put that together into some kind of conclusion. Right? We see this in science, as we would think of formal science. There's some science that by its nature is very theoretical. Like it has to be. So physics, astrophysics, a lot of these kinds of environments, very mathematical environments, are theory by its nature. It's putting together a mathematical formula where everything makes sense, the logic of the math works, you get to a valid conclusion that could be proven time and time again, but it's all abstract. It's all just numbers and symbols and variables on a whiteboard somewhere. Now, can we prove it with observation, with actual data? No, sometimes. Well, sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. But in many cases we can't. Why? Because we might be trying to talk about how a black hole really works, or how, the power of a neutron star or something like that that's too far away. We don't have the instruments to do it. We don't have the necessary tools to gather the data we need, right? So if the math works, then that's good enough and we leave it at that. In most other areas of science, we need evidence. We need physical hard evidence to validate your theory or your hypothesis, right? And now we need observation. We need actual measurements of something. We need statistics and all that. And now based on that, we can validate. That's very TE now. Right? So really, that's kind of where you can see it. People who have a nice healthy balance of TI and TE may be a little more difficult to spot this difference. So when you see somebody like SLEs, ILEs, ILIs, SLIs, people like that who all have TI or TE in the creative function, they usually show a pretty nice balance of using both. However, you'll still see the preference. you'll still see that they like one more than the other. They kind of enjoy diving into certain topics and things a bit more. Still, it's not always obvious. You kind of have to steer the conversation in that direction maybe. But you'll see that. You'll see that they like a certain thing. Meanwhile, you might see polar types. You might see types that don't use TE or don't use TI very much. That doesn't mean they can't. Does not automatically mean they cannot use it. They can if required or forced to, but usually they will try not to. So you'll see kind of an absence of it. So your IEEs, for example, classic type, that may like to get off into these very philosophical sounding concepts and theories on where humanity's going and civilization and like this and that and the other. But the whole thing is very hypothetical, very theory, very philosophy of just how they want to view stuff. And they will often have very little use of data of how the actual world works. They're just like, this is what we have shown through history to work. Here's the data and the facts and figures to prove it. Here's the examples to prove. They just kind of ignore a lot of that. And if you try to interject some of that into their stuff, they tend to just kind of gloss over and keep moving. Some types, like SEEs, maybe are the type that just kind of ignores TI more. They just don't really want to get into these conversations of like, well, what is this? How do we actually define this particular thing? According to the system, this is how you define this and how you define that and move into this and then this and then this. You'll notice they're kind of like, I don't really give a shit about the system and the like, I only pay attention as much as I need and then whatever. Let's talk about what we actually see happening. You know? And that's showing the polar side of it. That's showing just the absence of it. They're not really bringing it up much. They're kind of ignoring and avoiding it a lot. You see this a lot with certain individuals. Jordan Peterson is one of those types who shows a lot of TE because he's one of those guys who get in there and say, well, according to such and such political movement or such and such people, they say that this is what's supposed to happen, yada, yada. And then he'll go, but no, look at what the data shows us. Look at what all our measurements have shown us. Look at what the statistics and all our actual documented science has proven. And he's arguing almost exclusively, this is what the data shows, therefore, that's the truth of it. Forget your little theory. This is the real rub of it, right? It very, very data, observation, evidence driven. Forgetting I don't really care about theory. TI types, you know what? In the socionics or typology community, we see a ton of these people. Woo! Oh man, we see a lot of them because you know what? Socionics especially is very, very TI heavy. It's very TI driven. It's a lot of ILEs and LIIs and a lot of types like this and some SLEs, a good number of SLEs in there, and others that are just like running wild because they are loving playing around with the theory of it. Like, this is how the theory works. This is who came up with the theory. This was how they define stuff. And does that definition make sense, though? Let's think about it. If this, then that, then this, come that. And then you'll see these long-ass conversations break out where they're just trying to articulate, well, who actually defined SE or TI better? What does that actually make sense? But if you say that, then this and that. And it's this incredibly academic, just running around about just this theory concept. And the conversation just goes on and on for like an hour. But they're loving it. They're loving it. They're just going back and thinking about it and spending a lot of time with that. And then you have the TE people who are just like pulling their hair out. Just like, more of this shit. But it's great to do because they love to discuss this, again, the framework. Does the frame, the structure, make sense? Do the definitions make sense? And then do they all fall into the functions the way they're supposed to make sense? And then do they flow from one thing to the next make sense? And then, whatever. When you combine that, especially with a lot of NE, like NETI, then you start getting into people who are trying to add more stuff. The LIIs, for example, seem to always be motivated to combine theories upon more theories. They want to take MBTI, Socionics, Enneagram, Barron's, Santa Claus, everyone's fucking theory, and like lump them all together and then see which is working and how can we blend them together, and then how did this one meet with this one, and it just keeps expanding into this never-ending field of all these possible theoretical systems to put together. And it's just on and on and on. And again, the TE people are like, for the love of God, what does it matter? Like, can we just see if the thing fucking works? Prove to me that the shit is working the way it was supposed to. And if it works, great. I don't give a shit about whose theory and how many theories and where. Oh my God. Woo. So you see a lot. And I'll even give you some TI observation evidence on that one. Check out people who have channels and they are LII types, for example. People who are known LIIs, and I guarantee you their videos are 2.5 hour monstrosities, like Ben Vance, what's his name? People like that just like this never-ending theoretical fucking lectures bullshit. And they're always like 2.5 hour long discussions where he's trying to pull in everyone's theory, everybody's theory, and then how did this link to that, and this to this, to this to that, and so on. And it's almost like he can't even stay focused on the topic. That's TI gone crazy, especially when coupled with NE. And other people. I've seen it in other world socionics conversations. Other people, usually LIIs, they're just going nuts. So this kind of starts to dive a little bit into intertype relations. As an SCE, I'm not really supposed to get along well with LIIs, and I think that obviously came out in my rant, but there you go. So hopefully that clears up a few things or adds a little something to discussion. As always, I like to hear the conversation. I like to hear people's ideas and comments, so feel free to comment whatever you like, whatever thoughts you had. And if you want to add something or if you think I missed something, put it in there.